Pete Hegseth did not get cornered by a speech, a slogan, or some cheap cable news punchline. He got cornered by one badge, one DD Form 214, one Army regulation, and 73 seconds of silence. That is the kind of silence that does not sound empty. It sounds like a locked door after the key has already been taken away. In Senate Armed Services Committee Room 216, at 10:23 on a Friday morning, Senator Joni Ernst did not walk into that hearing looking for a viral moment. She walked in with the one thing Pete Hegseth could not talk his way around: a combat action badge, earned under fire in Iraq, documented by the United States Army, and heavy enough to turn the entire room cold the second she placed it on the witness table. This was not a normal confirmation hearing. This was a military honor audit conducted in public. This was not about whether Pete Hegseth had served. He had served. This was about whether Pete Hegseth had spent years inflating that service into something far more sacred, far more dangerous, and far more morally expensive: combat experience. And that is where Senator Joni Ernst turned the hearing from politics into evidence. She did not begin with applause lines. She did not waste time praising his resume. She opened the small dark blue case, showed the silver badge mounted against black velvet, and forced the room to look at the difference between service and combat. Then she asked the question that should have been easy for any man who publicly talked about firefights, combat deployments, and the lessons of war. "Mr. Secretary, show me your combat action badge." 5 words, one impossible demand. Because under Army Regulation AR 600-8-22, a combat action badge is not a decoration for being near a war zone. It is not a souvenir for standing beside danger. It is awarded when a soldier is personally present and actively engaged by the enemy. That means enemy fire. That means a documented event. That means a record that follows you for the rest of your life. Senator Joni Ernst had that record. Pete Hegseth, according to the documents laid out in that room, did not. And that is the frame. A Bronze Star recipient and Iraq War veteran placed proof on the table. A political media figure who had claimed the language of combat sat across from her. And the American people were about to watch whether a man who built authority from war stories could survive the simplest test in military life: prove it. Senator Joni Ernst did not ask Pete Hegseth to explain his philosophy of leadership. She asked him for proof. That distinction matters, because Washington is full of men who can survive a philosophy question with polished sentences, patriotic fog, and 3 rehearsed lines about sacrifice. But proof is different. Proof has edges. Proof has dates. Proof has signatures. Proof has a box on a military form that either contains the truth or exposes the performance. And when Senator Joni Ernst moved into that territory, Pete Hegseth's entire public image started to shrink in real time. He tried the first escape route. He said he served with distinction in the National Guard. That may sound strong to a television audience, but it did not answer the question. Senator Joni Ernst did not ask whether Pete Hegseth wore the uniform. She asked whether he had the combat action badge. So she brought him back to the point. "Do you have one?" That was the moment the room changed. Because a man can wrap himself in general military language for years, but a combat action badge is not general language. It is specific. It is earned under a specific standard. It is attached to a specific kind of danger. Pete Hegseth then pointed to Guantanamo Bay, trying to stretch a detention facility assignment into the emotional territory of combat. Senator Joni Ernst cut that off immediately. Guantanamo Bay was not the question. Enemy fire was the question. Active engagement was the question. Documentation was the question. And when she asked whether he had been engaged by enemy fire there, The answer was not a speech. It was no. Then came the second receipt. DD Form 214. The discharge paperwork. The record that does not care about television branding, book marketing, campaign applause, or cable news toughness. Senator Joni Ernst read through the awards and decorations. Army Commendation Medal, Army Achievement Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal. Then the missing piece landed harder than anything printed on the page. No Combat Action Badge. That absence was not a typo in the drama. That absence was the drama. Because the Iraq Campaign Medal could show deployment. It could show presence in theater. It could show proximity to the war. But it could not magically transform proximity into combat. And Senator Joni Ernst made that line brutally clear. There is no shame in support service. There is no shame in not being shot at. There is no shame in serving honorably without ever firing a weapon under enemy attack. But there is shame in turning that service into a costume of combat. There is shame in speaking as if you stood in firefights when the record does not follow you there. There is shame in borrowing the moral weight of soldiers who actually heard the blast, saw the smoke, felt the concussion, and had to make decisions while human beings were trying to kill them. That is why Senator Joni Ernst's question was so dangerous. It did not accuse first. It verified first. And verification is where inflated stories go to die. Then Senator Joni Ernst reached for the part Washington fears most, the public record. Not rumor, not vibes, not some whispered veteran community complaint. The record. She placed Pete Hegseth's own words beside Pete Hegseth's own paperwork. And that is where the contradiction stopped being political and started looking forensic. A Fox News transcript, a campaign speech, a public claim about combat deployments, and another claim about lessons learned in firefights in Iraq. Those were not accidental phrases tossed into the air by a tired man after a long day. Those were identity-building words. They were the kind of words that make audiences lean forward, because combat has a moral gravity ordinary politics does not have. When someone says he was in a firefight, he is not simply describing a job assignment. He is asking the listener to grant him a special kind of authority. He is saying, I have seen the worst version of reality, so trust me when I speak about war, troops, readiness, sacrifice, and command. That is exactly why Senator Joni Ernst did not let him hide behind broad service language. She narrowed the room down to one brutal question. Were you engaged by the enemy? And when the answer came back no, every previous phrase began to collapse under its own weight. Because combat zone is not the same as combat. Deployment is not the same as a firefight. Support capacity is not the same as returning fire. And I served near danger is not the same as I earned the right to speak as if danger personally came for me. That is the internal contradiction Senator Joni Ernst exposed. Pete Hegseth wanted the honor of combat without the documentation of combat. He wanted the emotional force of the story without the Army record that would make the story real. And the most damaging part was not just what he said, it was what he did not say. He did not say, yes, Senator, here is my combat action badge. He did not say, yes, Senator, here is the award citation. He did not say, yes, Senator, here is the documented enemy engagement. He sat there as the silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a full minute. 73 seconds of political oxygen leaving the room. And in that silence, the audience could see the real issue. This was not about humiliating a veteran for serving in a support role. That would be cheap. And Senator Joni Ernst knew it. Support troops keep wars functioning. Support troops carry danger, stress, distance, duty, and sacrifice. The disgrace is not support service. The disgrace is taking support service and dressing it up as combat, when actual combat veterans carry memories that never leave them. That is the moral line in this hearing. A combat action badge is not jewelry. It is not a talking point. It is not a prop for a book tour or a television segment. It is a small piece of metal attached to a day someone may still see in nightmares. And when Senator Joni Ernst held up her badge, she was not showing status. She was showing cost. The blast on Route Tampa, the small arms fire, the split-second fear, the soldiers depending on each other. The kind of day that does not become a slogan because it was too real when it happened. So when Pete Hegseth said he may have misspoken, that word landed like a second offense. You misspeak when you get a date wrong. You misspeak when you confuse a committee name. You do not casually misspeak your way into a firefight. You were either there when bullets came in, or you were not. And if the paperwork says you were not, then the story was not a mistake. It was a borrowed uniform of credibility. And that is where this hearing stopped being about Pete Hegseth's resume and became something much bigger. Because the real victim in a stolen combat story is not a political opponent. It is the soldier who did earn the badge. It is the medic who crawled through dust and blood while rounds cracked over the road. It is the young private who came home with no headline, no television contract, no book tour, and no appetite for pretending war was some dramatic credential to be pulled out when the cameras turned on. It is the family sitting at a kitchen table years later, listening to a veteran wake up in the middle of the night because the body remembers what the country has already moved past. That is the cost Senator Joni Ernst placed on the table when she opened that blue case. Not metal, not decoration, memory, proof. A receipt written in fear, fire, and survival. And that is why Pete Hegseth's silence mattered more than any answer he could have given. For 73 seconds, the room did not need a speech. The room had the question. The room had the regulation. The room had the DD Form 214. The room had the missing combat action badge. The room had his public words stacked against his official record. That is how accountability works when someone finally strips away the fog. You do not need to scream when the documents are already talking. You do not need to exaggerate when the absence on the page is louder than the man at the witness table. And Senator Joni Ernst understood exactly what she was prosecuting. She was not saying every veteran must have combat experience to matter. She was saying no one gets to manufacture combat experience and then use it as a shield against scrutiny. No one gets to borrow the moral authority of the battlefield and spend it like campaign cash. No one gets to stand in front of the American people, talk about firefights, combat deployments, and brothers in combat, then retreat into technical language when asked for the one badge that would prove it. Because this is not just about one man's credibility. This is about whether military service still means something precise in American public life. This is about whether records matter. This is about whether honor can still outrank branding. This is about whether the law applies only to ordinary people, or whether powerful men with microphones, television careers, and political sponsors can inflate the truth until it becomes useful. And if a combat action badge can be treated like a vibe instead of a verified honor, then what else can be faked? A record? A sacrifice? A war story? A mandate to lead people who may actually have to bleed? That is the question this hearing leaves behind. Because Senator Joni Ernst walked in with proof. Pete Hegseth sat there with silence. And in a room built for testimony, silence became the confession the documents had already prepared. So if you believe public service should still require truth, hit like. If you think military honor should never be used as a political costume, drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still believes records matter. And subscribe, because the next time Washington tries to bury a contradiction but under patriotic language, we are going to pull the receipt back into the light.